Ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, Paul Vanderbilt, on the review desk. Welcome. In this program, we discuss all matters of entertainment, and tonight, with Mr. Desmond Kerk, an avid fan of comic books and films, we'll discuss and review the film The Batman. Desmond, how are you today?
Doing great, Paul. Thank you again for having me on the show.
The pleasure's all ours, I assure you. Now, for those of you listening, Desmond is somewhat of a cinephile with a number of particular traits. Desmond, why don't you tell the folks at home a little bit about it?
Well, Paul, I'll tell you, I love movies. If I really want to see a movie, I want to know as little as possible about what people thought of it. I don't want to know what the reviews said. I don't want to know the audience scores. I don't want to know how much it made at the box office. I just want to go in blind.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, you want to be surprised.
Absolutely.
Now, how does this translate to different social relations?
It can be a bit difficult because not everybody feels the same way. I know people who don't mind spoilers at all. They could read the entire script of a movie beforehand and still enjoy the movie when they finally see it, So I try to tell people, I don't expect you to have the same habit as I do simply because you're my friend or because you know me. You can talk about the movie or read the reviews as much as you want. Everybody has their own thing. The only thing that I ask is that you respect my wishes and not talk about it to me. Because, like I said, I really want to be surprised.
That's perfectly understandable. Now, in that respect, this video and any coming reviews will be divided into segments to which you can navigate with the appropriate timestamps. Whether you're someone who prefers the bliss of traversing the unknown, or if you dive into spoilers with a sound mind, we would like to make sure you can enjoy these videos. Now, Desmond, as I've mentioned before, today we'll be reviewing The Batman, the 2022 film based on the famous DC Comics character. Before the quintessential inquiries as to the good of the bad of the movie, I have a question for you, and one from a number from listeners.
Okay.
My question is, what does the DC in DC Comics stand for?
It actually stands for Detective Comics. Now, I know what people are thinking. That means that the name is Detective Comics. It's a bit of a complicated history, but it basically comes down to the fact that the company actually started as two separate companies. One was National Allied Publications, and the other was Detective Comics, Inc. The merger of these two companies resulted in a name that was too long, so readers just started calling the company DC Comics.
So, was this an official take of the company, that it was changed to DC Comics?
No, the company's name officially didn't change to DC Comics until 1977. So yeah, one of the comics in that name might seem redundant, but that's just what it is. We just call it DC. We don't spell it out DC, Detective Comics. We just call it DC Comics.
I guess it's stuck, eh? Most likely also the reason why they choose to stick to the abbreviation rather than the full title. Thank you, Desmond. Now, for our following question, you yourself are known as a proud Batman fan.
Oh, yes.
Now, the internet was abuzz when news hit that Robert Pattinson would be the latest actor to take up the mantle, or cowl, as the case may be, of the Batman. Some felt his association with such productions as Twilight made him unfit for the role. Others dropped the name of Heath Ledger, saying that an actor often surprises naysayers by presenting a brilliant performance. What was your impression of Mr. Pattinson's casting as the Batman?
Well, his performance in Twilight shouldn't be an issue. Many actors have done a range of different projects, and that shouldn't be held against them. That being said, Heath Ledger is name dropped too often. That card is played too often. Forgive the pun. Oh, yes, indeed. For every Heath Ledger who surprises us and delivers a stunning performance, there are about 1,000 Jesse Eisenbergs who are simply miscast. You're not too fond of Mr. Eisenberg and his role as Lex Luthor in the Batman vs. Superman film? No, I think he was terribly miscast. He's a great actor, but the portrayal and what they were going for Lex Luthor as the young billionaire, I don't think that worked. I think they really it was a huge miss. And the fact that he was given all this zany stuff to work with, I don't think it worked. So I don't believe Heath Ledger's name should be dropped every time an actor's ability to perform a role is brought in question, you know. That being said, I think Robert Pattinson did a great job. I was initially skeptical, not because of his Twilight history, but because he didn't give me a Bruce Wayne vibe. Now, Bruce Wayne is, of course, the alter ego of the Batman, the secret identity, if you will. How important would you rank a good performance as Bruce Wayne? Well, to answer that question, my favorite Batman actor is Christian Bale. Not only because he was brilliant as Batman, but as Bruce Wayne was also memorable. A lot of times Batman media doesn't spend enough time on portraying Bruce Wayne properly. In the context of this movie, Bruce is somewhat gloomy, reflecting the very state of Gotham itself. He's not the playboy that we've come to know. So, but again, in the theme of the movie, it works. I also had an issue with with Robert Pattinson saying things like, Batman is not a real superhero because he doesn't have superpowers, and refusing to bulk up for the role. That says to me that you don't really understand and or respect the character. As for the gaining weight, a suit's padding can do a lot of work, but we're going to see you out of the suit at some point. But again, as I said, in the context of the film, the sense of gloom, the desperation, the pessimism, Pattinson was a good fit for the role. Would you say that he proved the naysayers wrong? To an extent, there are definitely areas where he could improve upon, but the fact that this is Batman in his second year makes sense that he's still a bit unpolished. He's got range as an actor, so I think he'll be able to pull it off if they go ahead with the planned sequels. Right, that answers that question. I'd like to talk to you about what you thought about what the movie did right. What would you say are the good things? Good things. This is the first Batman film to really put an emphasis on the detective part of Batman. Oh, yes. A lot of films will hint at it, but I love the fact that this movie really made it a part of the story. I was worried the fighting would take a backseat because their emphasis was on the detecting skills, but the movie has a nice balance to it. The fight scenes are intense, beautifully choreographed, and Batman is made vulnerable enough to remind us that he isn't the great Dark Knight yet. You know, he's one of the most capable fighters in the DC universe. Pretty much everybody's afraid to lift a hand against this guy, but here we still see him struggling to win a fight. We still see him go down. We still see him make mistakes. So it's a clear indication that this is Batman. He's just not the Batman we've come to know yet. They managed to really capture all the aspects of Batman, the impossible duality of being both a fighter and a thinker. I also very much love the acting. Pretty much everybody delivered top-notch performances. Jeffrey Wright was great as Commissioner Gordon. Colin Farrell as Penguin was a nice surprise. He's also now one of the actors who have portrayed both a DC and Marvel character in live action. Yes, if I remember correctly, Colin Farrell portrayed the character Bullseye in the 2006 Daredevil movie. From what I understand from fans, the less said about that movie, the better. Yeah, it wasn't really. This was way before the MCU took root, so it's a period we don't necessarily like to talk about. Yeah, there was a slew of not so great movies around that time. Yeah, sure. So, yeah, he's one of the few actors now to also have done both in live action, both a DC and a Marvel character. Zoe Kravitz, speaking of the acting, she was a standout for me. I've never been a real fan of hers, but to be honest, she surprised me as Selena Kyle. Aside from her acting, was the mannerisms that really made the role. There's a certain feline touch to her movements in the film, and that really made her put down a nice Catwoman. Her suit, I'm sure a lot of people will feel it looked shoddy and amateurish, but that's kind of the point. She's struggling financially in the film. She doesn't have the funds to build a fancy suit to prounce around in. This costume just screams that it's homemade, and that's kind of the point. In terms of costumes, the entire movie basically went for functionality over aesthetics, very much like the Nolan films. This also goes for the Batmobile, which definitely functionality over aesthetics. It kind of again captures what the movie was going for, the tone. It seems unpolished, it seems unfinished, but it's very powerful and it gets the job done. So when I saw the car in the trailer, I was a bit skeptical. I was like, why are they giving Batman a muscle car, But I loved it in the film. So it's just another reminder that sometimes you need to watch the film before you make up an opinion about it and not just bash it based on the trailer. So I think this is definitely one of the best Batmobiles we've seen. The cinematography of this film is fantastic. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful to look at, despite the fact that we're talking about a gloomy Gotham that isn't very colorful, very gloomy. It's just very crisp. And lastly, my absolute favorite part about this movie is the music. I can't talk about this movie without mentioning the music. If you had told me 5 years ago that a Nirvana song would be used as a basis for a Batman theme, I would have asked you what you've been smoking. Yes, indeed. It is quite an unorthodox combination. Did you particularly like the new Batman theme? It was epic. It had an amazing build-up. It really emphasizes what Batman stands for, the fear he instills in criminals everywhere. I love how this was used in the beginning of the film with crooks second-guessing their next move because Batman could pop out of the shadows at any time. That's the power of the Batman mythos. He gives the impression of being everywhere, and they believe it. It's a powerful theme. It doesn't try too hard, but it does what it's supposed to do. And it's a foundation. When Batman steps out of the shadows and faces the gang, you'd expect him to run away because of the Batman myth. But the myth hasn't been built up enough yet. He's still a man standing in front of them, and they take a shot. This is going to get to a point where when he shows up, everybody backs off because the legend of Batman has become larger than life. So yeah, again, Batman Year 2, I love that they didn't make him invincible, but he's also not a rookie. He makes mistakes, he gets in stalemates, but at the end of the day, he gets the job done.
Now, when discussing the Batmobile, you've previously mentioned the Nolan films. Did you at any point find yourself making comparisons to that series in this film?
To be honest, not really. This film has its own unique style. It's a bit more bleak than Nolan's Gotham, so I don't think anybody can say it outright rips off Nolan. There isn't enough to say it's a straight rip-off or they're trying to copy Nolan, no.
Well, we've certainly gotten the idea of what you loved about the film. Now, for the hard part.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I'd like to ask you, what aspects of the film didn't you particularly like?
Well, my first point of criticism is probably the same as everybody else's. The movie's too long. It's too long. There were definitely pieces that should have been left on the cutting room floor. Too many story points. We could have done without Carmine Falcone, which, speaking of Carmine Falcone, John Turturro did a great job in terms of acting, but I would have picked somebody else. He wasn't imposing. Is Carmine Falcone an imposing figure in the comics? Oh, he's a very imposing figure. He's probably the biggest crime boss in Gotham. But I don't know, maybe it's because we've seen Turturro and other stuff, but also I don't feel he has the build to be that intimidating. So I wasn't feeling him. I wasn't feeling the intimidation and the power and respect. So I think that despite the fact that he's a great actor, maybe they should have cast somebody else. But again, the story points, it also took away from the impact. Carmine Falcone being Catwoman's father, it might have hit a bit harder if we'd seen them both around much longer, maybe for 2 movies or so. But here to just drop it like, oh yeah, he's her father, it doesn't have that much of an impact, because we haven't gotten to know either of them enough for it to have a decent impact. And while I appreciate the movie focusing more on the detective part of Batman's mission, again, it can feel a little drawn out sometimes. And as I said before, I did enjoy the fact that there was this gloominess, this bleakness about the movie. But one of the things, probably my least favorite thing about the film, is the plot point concerning Thomas and Martha Wayne. Yes, now, of course, the plot point is directed at the fact that Thomas Wayne contracts Carmine Falcone, or Falcone, to intimidate a journalist who has threatened to make public Martha Wayne's mental illness issues. Now, Thomas Wayne finds this a bit of an embarrassing scenario, so he approaches Carmine Falcone to intimidate the journalist into staying quiet. Yes, and I didn't feel it was necessary. Aside from the fact that you're putting Thomas Wayne in a bad light and making light of mental health issues, it felt unnecessary. I think in terms of the bleakness of the film, they wanted to kind of have Bruce question the fact that his father has always been held in high regard and make him face the fact that the world might not be as good as he thinks it is. Like, according to him, there's probably very little good in it. But if your father, who you've always looked up to, has been revealed to be someone who's in bed with the mafia, then that would kind of crush any positivity you have left, So I didn't feel it was necessary. They could have done without it. Another thing I didn't like was the Joker scene at the end. Not only is it highly unlikely that Riddler would just happen to be in the cell next to Joker, but we don't need Joker in every piece of Batman media. He's quite a popular character. Perhaps that's why they wrote him in. He's popular, but the fact that the Riddler made a good villain in this movie on his own doesn't mean we have to always fall back on the Joker. If he ever shows up in a sequel for this series, I'd like to see that. But he felt kind of shoehorned in and at the last moment kind of stole some of the Riddler spotlight. So it felt unnecessary. Yes. Now, you said earlier that the Batman instills fear. How do you feel about the end of the film where Batman tries to inspire rather than intimidate? I felt that for this movie, it worked. As I've said, he's still new. He's moving in a different direction. It's not saying he's that way in the comics, nor is it saying his way of working from the dark is wrong. His actions at the end of the movie counteract the very bleakness that Gotham radiates. They could use a symbol of positivity. Yes, indeed. Now, all that being said, with the positive and the negative weighing it,
Are you looking forward to a sequel?
I wouldn't mind seeing a sequel. I'm curious where this Batman is going to go next. I like to see how he's going to grow. There is a lot of Batman history to tap into, but there's also new terrain to explore in this series. As a comic book fan, I've learned to be open to different interpretations of a character, so they don't necessarily have to stick to what happens in the comics. They can go crazy as long as they're respectful to the source material.
Yes, respect for the source material is definitely a must. Desmond, thank you for sharing with us your opinions on the film. We truly appreciate it.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening into the Review Desk. Should you have any questions or recommendations for films you'd like to have our establishment review, feel free to inform us. Goodbye and good fortune until next time.